All right, everybody. Welcome to the Contextual Christian Church Bible Study, where today we'll be reading Daniel chapter 9, verses 16 to 27. I'm going to pray it in. Everybody bow your heads. Father, thank you for a lot of the things that have been going on as far as some us accomplishing certain goals and that great study that we had the other day. I pray that with this study that we're able to get the context and explain it a little bit better and see what Daniel is getting into and see what we can learn out of that. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. By the way, I could hear you, but you started going robotic a little bit on my side, but I could hear you. All right. So last time we had spoken about in Daniel chapter 9, we started with the first 15 verses where we got into another vision that Daniel had, but this time, instead of it being during the Babylonian and the Chaldees, it was in the first year where Darius, one of the children of the Medes, which so they're not fully in charge yet of the Medes, was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. Now, as we remember, the Babylonians and Chaldeans is one empire together. So still part of that first. But we have in the first year of his reign, Daniel started going into about the 70 years in desolation, talking about that 70-year span where they're either in other regions or basically, long story short, all the children of Israel, they were brought away into captivity and they have not all been brought back to the land of Israel as of yet, all because they went against God in so many ways. And that's really what the context boiled down to. Last time, we got a heartfelt, sincere apology from Daniel, where what ended up being the situation is that Daniel is talking to God, explaining not just generically what they did wrong and why they're in the position, but specifically some of the things that they did wrong with the idolatry and everything, and how like they saw all the wrath that God is capable of and still wanted to play games and still wanted to treat him wrong, and how God had saved them and done so much for them and how they had done wrong by him. Really going in about all this turmoil, so to speak, of how they've been treating God. And the last part that we got into was about explaining how God had saved them from the land of Egypt and how God already has renown. And still, even at this day or the day when he wrote this, but he points out that we have sinned and we have done wickedly. So going real humble and going real honest in a true apology, but we haven't gotten into the end result goal yet, just the expression of understanding that we have so far. So I'll go ahead and switch it to our first section for today so that Charles can read.
All right.
Can you see it okay, Charles?
I can see it okay. I just want to make sure I had to move a little bit to make sure that I don't sound like a robot while I'm reading.
Yeah, you sound perfectly clear right now.
Okay, let's keep it going. I'll be reading Daniel chapter 9, verses 16 to 20. I'll give it a couple seconds before I start reading. Verse 16. Oh Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from thy city, Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that are about us. Now, therefore, our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate, for the Lord's sake. Oh my God, incline thine ear and hear, open thine eyes and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. For we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousness, but for thy great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not for thine own sake. Oh my God. For thy city and thy people are called by thy name. And whilst never mind. And whilst I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord, my God, for the holy mountain of my God. Oh, it's going to continue into the next section. So, starting off, I don't want to overthink it because I'm tired, brain. Now we're getting into the part of the forgive me and forgive Jerusalem, God. Turn your anger, your fury away from the city of Jerusalem. Well, basically from us. Even though we already talked about his specific prayer on how it's a specific apology of, children of Israel doing bad, turning away from them, doing evil, all of these other things. Now we're getting into that part of forgive us. Let us get right back with you. Let us get back to that city. Also, let me bring up a couple other points that he's bringing up in this forgive us prayer. While he's talking about this forgiveness part, he's bringing up, well, one, in verse 16, he brought up Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that are about us. Now, in the way it's using reproach, let me go to the Strongs from H2778. Contumely, disgrace, the pudenda, rebuke. So we are shameful, disgraceful, disrespectful people, but we're still begging for that forgiveness. Dang, Daniel. I want to bring up another thing. Let me read 17. Now, therefore, O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate, for the Lord's sake. In other words, what I just brought up about hearing his prayer and, God hearing him out to, shine upon the sanctuary that we already read about before, for God's sake, for God's name's sake, his reputation. Let me go into. I mean, that's pretty much a broad sense. I'm gonna reread 18, 19, and 20 to see if there's some other things I need to bring up. But in a broad sense, my section's just, hear my prayer or hear the prayer, and forgive not just me in my sense, but forgive the children of Israel, forgive the previous generation, forgive this generation now. Verse 18. Oh my God, incline thine ear. By the way, Matt, I don't know if you noticed the pause that I put into that. That's kind of hard to read.
Yeah.
Because I've been working on not swearing in the name of the Lord to the point where when I'm reading it, I'm like, I still feel like I'm doing it, but incline thine ear and hear, open thine eyes and behold our desolations.
Well, remember, that's the difference, is that he's not saying it to somebody else. He's talking to God.
Yeah, he's talking straightly to God.
And that's the whole point. Like, that's the thing, that using God's name in vain does not mean that you never say God. It doesn't mean that you never say, oh my God. It means that if you're saying, oh my God, it's not useless, it's not pointless, it's not an expression of stress or frustration or disappointment. It's you're talking directly to God, and it's an expression of your passion. Oh my God, please help me in this.
Yeah.
It's a sort of begging or beseeching of God.
Yeah.
Then it's not using his name in vain when you're doing that. But go ahead and continue.
Okay. Oh my God, incline thine ear and hear, open thine eyes and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. For we do not present our supplication before thee for our righteousness, but for thy great mercies. Well, that last part, for we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousness, bringing it up that when we're praying to you, when we're begging and pleading and beseeching you, we're not doing it in that moment of like, oh, because we're above you, or we're above this, or we're above that, or we're doing the right thing no, with no, I'm trying to think of the word, acting as if we don't have to apologize for things, acting like we don't need the forgiveness in a sense, the lack of humbleness. We're doing it for your great mercies. Verse 19, O Lord, hear, O Lord, forgive, O Lord, hearken and do, defer not for thine own sake. Oh my God, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. And whilst I was speaking, so in the end, it's him still talking, but it's him talking about while he was talking and praying and confessing his sin, the sin of the children of Israel, doing all this stuff. And then there's supposed to be a continuation of verse 20, but it's going to get into the next section. Yeah, that's all I got to say for my section.
There's one big part that you didn't bring up. And your hint is it's in 20. And I'm pretty sure there was another spot that it was in. Let me see. No. No,
I'm probably
20.
I'm overthinking this one at 20. Because 20 it's a continuation. So
It's remember, think about before you answer. What did I ask?
Something I missed in verse. Well, you said it was in verse 20, but you didn't say what other verse it was in.
Exactly. Well, I said no, it's not in any afterwards. But it's so you already brought up that it's a continuation. But remember, I did not say anything about the continuation, right? So it has to be something in 20 only. So what did you not bring up that relates to 20 only and not the rest?
Because I brought up the part of him, praying about his sin and the sin of the children of Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God.
Do you know what it is?
No, I don't. But that sounds like the part I'm missing.
Let me give Thomas the secondary hint. Thomas, you able to answer?
Yes.
So the first part of it that I gave to Charles, as you know, I told you before, I always give more on the second attempt. So first part is that it is specifically in 20, nowhere else in this section, just in 20. Charles did not bring it up, and here's the secondary. Tip or hint. It has to do with sin.
Okay.
It's only in 20, not 16 through 19 at all.
Yeah.
Not in 21, only in 20. Charles did not bring it up, but it does have to do with sin.
Is it the confession of the sin and the people of Israel?
Well, you're not answering. I said, what is it?
The
said it has to do
confession,
with
confessing of his sins and
what
the
about
sins
it?
of the. I thought it was just the confession in itself.
No, Charles brought that up.
Okay.
So do you not know?
The fact that yeah, I don't know.
No. What were you about to say? The fact of what? Maybe that would be right answer. The fact of what?
It was still revolving around confessions. I was going to say the fact that they're aware of their sins and wanting to confess in the first place.
Nope. Charles did bring that up and that's in the other sections.
Okay.
All right. So here I'll put it in the answer in the form of a question. Charles, have we read one sin that Daniel did?
No. Go ahead.
Exactly. Thomas, have we read one sin that Daniel did?
No.
Now, this is why this is important. Now, let's see if you remember. Charles, did we read any potential sin that would be related to Daniel?
No, this is something I was bringing up in that last study. How he's doing this prayer for all of Israel, even though we didn't read him doing anything like negative or bad or any sins.
Thomas, did we read any potential sins that had to do with Daniel?
No, not that I can remember.
Did you hear me earlier?
You guys failed. I did hear you.
Okay, my bad.
No, you're good. You're good. You both failed that answer. We did hear one thing that would be a possible sin that has to do with Daniel. So I'll give you a hint. It has to do with someone from Babylon, from the Babylonian Empire. Last chance to get it right. Charles, then Thomas.
Let me lower my hand. Nebuchadnezzar bowing to him after doing the visions. I totally forgot about that. I'm glad you brought it up. Go ahead.
We only have one instance where we saw something that, from what we understand in the Bible, could potentially be a sin that Daniel committed. We saw him go as far as to following God, to where he went to the lion's den. We went so far as to see with him following God that he refused to bow before anything. That even when it was a rule that you can't pray to God, he went right back to praying 3 times a day, just like he normally was. However, we did read one situation when Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar about a dream, and Nebuchadnezzar bowed, not just in reverence, not out of respect, not out of showing obedience. It specified bowing in worship. So we finally have, based on all context we have as far as we know, we finally have confirmation that yes, Daniel was in sin for that, because of the most likely the context, because outside of that, we have literally 0 examples of Daniel sinning against God. And we have all these examples of Daniel following God faithfully. The only example of sin that we have is where Nebuchadnezzar bowed in worship to Daniel, and Daniel did not correct him or tell him not to do that. So by the accounts of context that we have, the only possibility that we have of a sin that Daniel could be talking about is that situation. Does that make sense, Thomas and Charles?
Yeah, just needed a reminder.
So now, because this is so far later on, is it possible that that's not the sin that he's talking about? Charles?
Yes.
Oh, no, Thomas's turn. Thomas's turn. My bad.
Oh, my
Thomas? I don't want to leave him out.
Thinking along the lines of him not really committing any sins, I would say, yeah, that's the only one. And it's not possible that he's talking about anything else.
Incorrect. It is possible because, number one, we're so far later on. And remember, the Bible has everything that pertains to life and godliness, right? When it comes to Daniel, from all we've seen, is there more than one focus in the book of Daniel so far, Charles?
Yeah.
I mean, more than 2 focuses, I should say.
Well, more than 2 now. Yeah, because then you got what Daniel's be able to do. And yeah. There should be more than 2 focuses on what we've gotten so far. Because we gotten
you sure about that?
The visions of Daniel, him interpreting the visions and how he was able to do it. And we got the second part, which is going through those kings and part of those visions. How we already went through Nebuchadnezzar, we already went through his kid.
That's still part
now
of the
we're already
visions,
on the Medes.
Wouldn't the interpretation be part of the subject of the visions? Charles?
Yeah. You can say that. Yeah, you can say that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, exactly. So there's actually only two subjects that we've gone through in Daniel. Literally only two. One is the visions of Daniel, all the different visions and their interpretations, the visions of Daniel. And two, not bowing down regardless of the consequences, not worshiping false gods, in other words, regardless of the consequences. Those are the only two things that we have seen. Is God is the only God you serve, and the visions of Daniel for the future. And so when we go through this, is it possible that Daniel committed other sins? Yes, because what we're reading Daniel for, as the purpose we could say shows, we're not really reading Daniel to find out about all his mistakes. We're not really looking at his mistakes that much. The only thing we're really looking at with Daniel so far is the extent to where people are willing to go to not serve a false god, and the extent to where the visions and their interpretations. So yes, it is possible, but again, as we go through the context, it is definitely not likely to be something else, because that's the only sin we have listed for Daniel so far. So remember, possibility versus probability. It is probable that that is the sin, but it is not guaranteed. It is possible that he committed other sins, and we just haven't read about it. Does that make sense, Thomas and Charles?
Absolutely.
No, it does.
All right. Now, with that in mind, there's one last thing that needs to be added before we continue on. Because that is the most likely sin, that is most likely what it is based on what we have in context. It also goes to show that even if there's a moment of slip up with sin and something as wrong as idolatry, even with that slip up, as long as you don't delve into it and live in it, there's a possibility God will still use you even for visions if he so chooses, and interpretations. And then the secondary part, if that is the sin, as most likely it is, because we didn't see any condemnation or anything, but we did see him admitting it, that he did sin. And we look at the type of things he's described. Has he described fornication in his apology, Charles?
No.
Has he described murder or lying in his apology, Thomas?
No.
So what's the only real sin that he's really been discussing in his apology, Charles?
Could have sworn we've been talking about just turning away from God, the act of turning away from God, not following his rules and commands and all that. Nothing specific.
Exactly.
I had to go back.
We've really only been talking about idolatry, putting other things as more important than God. That's really been the only subject. We haven't gone specifically into lying. We haven't gone into adultery. We haven't gone into murder. It has been solely, the only things we've read about is about turning away from God, rejecting God. So again, that's another clue to the context that most likely sin that he's talking about is when Nebuchadnezzar, which gives us a little backing to say that yes, that was sinful, but and this is not the only time, right? Thomas, haven't we seen many times where somebody commits a sin, but they're not living in the sin, and God still uses them as a prophet or still uses them for stuff?
Absolutely.
So it's just another example of God's grace shining through. And it also, because of that context, it's a good example to explain, Yes, it is a sin to bow and worship to man, yet Jesus was not in sin for him being worshiped. More evidence to the point that Jesus is God in the flesh, because that's the only sin listed by Daniel, and yet it wasn't a sin when Jesus was worshiped. So when you go through and the time comes for you to teach, actually, I'll write this down in your notes. When you go to read the portion of Daniel being worshiped by Nebuchadnezzar, bring up verse 20 in connection to it, because that's the only sin that we have listed as a possible sin for Daniel. And the whole prayer has been about idolatry, putting other things as more important than God. All right? You guys got that?
Yep. I'm still writing it down.
All right. And while you go to write it down, I'm going to switch it to the second section. And before I read, does anybody have any comments or questions? Now would be the time to raise your hand. All right. Then I'll go ahead and read Daniel chapter 9, verse 21 to 25. Verse 21. Yea, whiles I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Sacrifice, in other words, for you guys. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. All right. So, from what we're seeing here, that man Gabriel, again, we're seeing another vision, the vision of the man Gabriel. Well, what name does Gabriel remind you of, Thomas?
I don't know.
Oh, Charles, you ever heard of the name Gabriel in relation to religion?
Yeah, I never did get a chance to ask this in the last Bible study when we brought him up. Now, I don't know if they brought it up in context or out of context. I've heard Gabriel the angel, but not in a
Yes.
good way. I haven't heard him used in a good way. But you'll tell me if they were right or wrong when they told me this.
Gabriel and Michael are both assumed angels of God, but that we know by name. Now, considering the vision and considering that it was a form of a man, Gabriel, and then a form of a man, Michael, it would make sense that they would be angels, because this is in the midst of a vision and he's flying. So we're seeing him in the spiritual form in this vision, and he's able to fly. It sounds like this is an angel based on the context. That's what it sounds like. But this is also a very important point. Again, when we see these angels, we haven't seen angels be described as God. But we have seen angels described as man, as mankind, looking like a man. Thomas, you ever heard or read when they talk about these angels having like 1,000 eyes and having all this crazy 4 wings and all this stuff? You ever heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Nowhere do we see that as what they look like from people's perspective. When we get to that part, the crazy part you're going to see again is the context. It's not saying that that's literally what they look like. It's giving a depiction like it was with the beasts. The animals represent something about them, what they seem like. The eyes represent things, the eagle represent things. These are representations. They're not literal descriptions. And this is why it's so important that when we look at things, when we look at these verses, remember we have to separate what's a metaphor, what's something trying to explain a point, versus what is an actual description. Every single description that we get from the Old Testament, from these areas where they're dealing with an angel, what are they always, so far, Charles, what have they always been described as looking like?
Looking like a man.
They've always been described as looking like a man. Not once have we seen them described as having all these crazy eyes and all this other stuff. So if they've always been described as looking like a man, then when we get to those verses about the many eyes and everything, we got to understand that's most likely not literal. That's a metaphor for how they can see all things going on. A sort of, not outside of time, but a sort of omnipresent situation with their ability to see. If we look at it from that perspective rather than literal, it makes a lot more sense when it brings up having their eyes surrounded all over. Because we know that there's metaphors in the Revelation, just like in Daniel, and we had some of those metaphors explained already. So why would we think that those angels having those crazy looks would be literal when we've had multitude of examples of people seeing the angels in the Old Testament, and they always look like a dude, like a regular guy. Scary, they got an essence about them, they got a light, they're freaky in that way, but they always look like a man. And then suddenly in Revelation, we're just supposed to take it as literal and not a metaphor when it brings those extra depictions, a book that's all about visions and metaphors. So I'll give that last question to Thomas before I continue with the explanation. Does it really make sense how people are taking this stuff so literal in Revelation, considering all the evidence that we have in the Old Testament of seeing angels?
Definitely not.
Exactly. So now, as going to this, with that vision from Daniel 9 that he had, going into about the end times and all that, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness. So, when we look at this, is this talking about the point of desolation that they're in right now? I'll go to Charles and then Thomas.
It doesn't sound like it. That they're talking about it in.
And are you confident in that answer?
No. The only reason that even made me think about it wasn't talking about like the situation that they're in now was in the verse in part of 24, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And then verse 25 about the Messiah, the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and boom, 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 boom. I'm not confident in my answer, but some of the keys kind of gave me that. I'm running in that direction.
Well, you should be confident, because that is exactly right. Do we have everlasting righteousness after after they return to Israel?
No. They do. Well, no. First off, Matt, will we read them returning to Jerusalem, Israel, and all that?
Yeah, remember their captivity and being taken away. That we get finished with that with Ezekiel and Daniel, and then we go into Ezra and those three. There's three more books.
Okay. Okay. So no, we don't get everlasting. We don't get that everlasting when they go everlasting righteousness when they go back. We don't at all.
Exactly.
We don't get it
So
until Jesus.
upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins. Were sins ended when they got back to Israel, Thomas?
Nope.
Exactly. So based on the fact that Jesus didn't come till hundreds of years later and they were already back in Israel, this cannot be talking about their return to Israel. This has to be talking about the end times when everything is coming to a close. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins. That gives us a time frame of how long they're going to have to deal with these problems that are being shown here when it becomes the end of the world. 70 weeks for the ones in the holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins. Well, when Jesus was on the cross, and this will go to Thomas first, since he's more likely, and then Charles. When Jesus was on the cross, did Jesus make an end of sins there?
No.
Exactly. Now, how do we know?
Yeah, he died for our sins, for the present, the past, and the future. He got crucified for our sins for the present, past, and future.
But how do we know that that's not him ending sins?
Because him being staked up on the cross was a sin in itself.
What the heck?
Hello?
No, but good try. Charles?
I
That
don't
was
want
a
to
good
throw a
try.
wild
That was a
guess
really
out
good try.
there. Yeah, I don't want to throw a
All
wild
right.
guess out there.
All right. So the fact of it is, and the reason that we know is because of what Jesus said. Jesus said about the Old Testament law for those that were under the circumcision and not under the New Testament, and that we're going to live under that. That law will not pass away till heaven and earth pass away. Did the earth pass away when Jesus went on the cross, Charles? Did we get a new planet?
No.
Thomas, did we get a new heaven when Jesus went on the cross
No.
or even when he resurrected? So there is still sins going on in the world. There was not an end of sin made. It still is happening today. We still sin. People still sin. This world is governed by sin for the outside of those who are following God. So none of this even took place when Jesus went through the crucifixion and setting up the gospel, performing the good news. So this has to be talking about the end times, not about the time of them returning. But as it went to point out in it, he said 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. Well, who would thy people be, Charles?
And not people, the reference of like those that follow God wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So this is something to keep in mind, that there's going to be godly people there, even to the end of the last tribulation, even to the end of the last transgression, even to the very end of sins. There will still be people who have obeyed God, who are following, who have to fight through and deal with this. Now, that's an interesting point to keep in mind, because Jesus said that he was waiting when he was asked about the judgment day, when it's going to be. He said there are still those that will be saved. Okay. So if there's still those that will be saved, is what we're waiting on. And if at the end times, there's going to be 70 weeks before, and they're going to be there until where sin is done. You know what that has to mean? That has to mean that at the end times, there has to be a point where there is nobody more getting saved, but there are still people alive that are saved. They're still following. Now, Thomas, I've said this before, but it's been so long, I don't know if you remember. So I'll go to you first and then Charles. Thomas, what is the only possible way that there can be no more people being saved, while at the same time, at the very end, there are saved people still alive?
Wasn't it in reference to birth, like no more people being born?
Yeah, because consider this, Charles, if there's still people being born and just continuing to be born, and there's still preachers preaching, are we ever going to get to a point where people are not getting saved anymore?
No.
Exactly. So if there's going to be people saved at the very end, and if it's going to be an end of sin, and we're waiting for everybody that will be saved to be saved, but they're going to be saved people alive at the end, and it could be wrong, but realistically, the only option that could mean is we have to get to a point where no one's being born anymore. That the only people are saved are people that are already chosen to follow, and there's no more kids being born, which would explain how we can get to this point. Thy people in thy holy city. Well, if we got to a point in life where the whole world was against Christianity, and to the point that people were getting killed, where are people going to go? They're going to fight, some of them, and a lot of people will die. There's going to be a point where people are going to get together and try to work together to defend themselves to be able to stay following. So it wouldn't be that big of a surprise if at the very end we did have a situation where they were over in one city and they were dealing with all the transgression around and everybody around. That is a actual realistic possibility, considering the way the world could be at that time. I mean, just imagine how crazy and hectic the world would be if there was nobody being born anymore. Just imagine that. And that's what we're talking about as the most likely. And this just backs it up a little bit further. And it also goes to show something else, that when Jesus comes back, it's going to be in the midst of turmoil. It's not going to be in a time of peace. There's going to be people, as the Bible talks about, people just going around making merry, doing things, but it's not going to be in a time where like people are striving to follow God and all that. Because otherwise this stuff wouldn't make sense. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
So, and then the final part that confirmed it in 24, and this is why it should not have been a question too, Charles, is to anoint the most holy. Well, to anoint the most holy, well, what does it mean to anoint? To set up, to separate, to sanctify. Well, if we're anointing the most holy, that would mean that God is finally bringing his kingdom in. And as we saw from the other verses about the walls being torn down and everything, are we talking about even at the time of Jesus? No, because there were parts that didn't happen. And then in 25, and know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. And the streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. So in the time of turmoil, when things are not going well, it's all bad of craziness, they're going to rebuild the wall, rebuild the temple. And from the time of Jerusalem, so when they build Jerusalem, through to when Messiah the Prince shall be, is 7 weeks. So again, we don't have a time frame for when the end is, but we do know that from the time when they actually restore and build Jerusalem to when the Messiah returns, well, when he comes from here, is 7 weeks. And notice that Jerusalem is built prior to the Messiah. It's built prior to the Messiah. In the tearing down of Jerusalem that happened when Jesus, after Jesus, was that before Jesus or after Jesus, Thomas? I don't know if you know the history on that.
Sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
So people, they like to look at the destruction of Jerusalem as talking about like, well, that was what it was talking about in some of this stuff. But in there, did that destruction of Jerusalem that happened around Jesus's time, did that happen before Jesus or after Jesus?
I'm not sure.
Charles?
I'm not sure either.
Okay. It happened after Jesus, not before. And they didn't build Jerusalem before. Jerusalem was already standing for the most part. There were parts of it that weren't standing, but it was basically standing for the most part. And then the Messiah had came. There was no building, there was no restoration at all. And the Messiah came, and then it was torn down after the fact. And so when we see that from here, this is saying that they restore and to build Jerusalem. And from that time frame till the Messiah, the Prince, shall be is 7 weeks. There was no building of Jerusalem prior to Jesus coming. There was no restoration of Jesus, of the Jerusalem prior to Jesus, 7 weeks before Jesus. That did not happen. So again, more evidence from what we read about in Matthew is not talking about the destruction of Jerusalem done by the Romans or Greeks. It's not talking about that because of this right here. It has to be talking about the end times. So at some point towards the very end, Jerusalem is going to be restored. The wall of it is going to be built up, and it's going to be in the midst of a time of trial, a time of tribulation. Now, this is another question that you should know the answer to, and we'll continue the order, Thomas then Charles, if Thomas doesn't get it. When Jesus came back, were they in a time of troubles, a time of problems?
Of course.
All right. Charles?
You said when Jesus came back?
When Jesus was there, like when he came down the first time coming, were they in a time of trials, a time of troubles throughout? Was it all troubles going around?
I don't remember there was.
This one goes to Charles. Thomas, did we read anything of wars going on during when Jesus was there?
Like when he first came?
Yeah, when he first came.
I wouldn't say specifically wars, but in regard to Herod and him and his bad behavior. King Herod.
But is that it? But that wouldn't be a troublous times. That would be a troublous individual, right? Like they weren't starving. They weren't in war. There wasn't
Okay.
persecution of the Israelites, was there?
No.
So when we look at it as, like it says, the troublous times, there was no troublous times going on when Jesus came the first time. It was a time of peace. So even if they wanted to say that that was it too, even for that, so every single part of 25 debunks the idea of it talking about the destruction of Jerusalem from the Romans and Greeks. All of that gets debunked by 24 and 25. This has to be talking about at the end of everything, because there are parts that contradict everything that happened. Number one, when Jesus came, it wasn't in a troubled times the first time he came. It was a time of peace. They didn't even have persecution for the Jews. They were peacefully being able to worship how they wanted. Matter of fact, they were in such a time of no trouble that the Greeks got irritated with them, talking about, why are you coming to me with the problems when you have your own authority to deal with it yourself? How much time of peace do you have to have, Charles, to where a governance says, you already have the authority to deal with it yourself? Why are you coming to me?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So this is not a time of trouble when Jesus came the first time. So at some point after Jesus came and after he left, at some point, and it hasn't happened since then, so we're still waiting on that, the wall is going to be built. It's going to be in the midst of troubling times. They're going to build and restore Jerusalem. And once they build and restore Jerusalem and they build the wall, so the temple will be rebuilt and all that, there will be 7 weeks from that time until the Messiah shall be. And here's another part that it points out. Again, when it says the Messiah, what does it say right after the Messiah, Thomas? In 25?
The prince shall be
And
7
so,
weeks. Go ahead.
no, just the prince part. So what does that say about the Messiah?
The prince of princes.
Go sit down with her.
A good try, but no. Charles, what does that say about the Messiah?
We're talking about Jesus, back that reference back to Isaiah 9:7.
What about it?
Prince of Peace. How can I not remember the rest of it?
In order to be a prince, what do you
Prince
have to
of
be
Peace
in
was one
relation
of
to the
them.
king?
Son of the King, son of God.
There you
yeah.
go.
Yeah.
This is evidence that the Messiah is going to be the Son of God, because a prince is a son of the king. And being the Prince of Peace, we see what that is. We also read recently, I think it said the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords at one point. And that's another thing that popped up, that the Messiah was going to be the King of Kings, or it's called the King of Kings at one point. Prince of Princes, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. So we have all this showing we're talking about the end times. We have some information on what's going to happen at the end of the end times. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know the day nor the hour. But we do know one thing for sure. It definitely ain't going to be no time of peace. So how could it not be a time of peace, Charles? Oh, no, Thomas's turn, my bad. How could it not be a time of peace? And also at the same time, people are just making merry, having a good time, not seeing it coming.
Are you ready?
That's a good question that I don't have the answer to.
Okay. Charles?
I think you said it before in the study with the one before. I don't want to throw a random guess out.
All right. Because for those in sin and those living with the world, it'll be a time of peace. Not peace, but they'll be enjoying. They'll be partying up, having a good time. But for those that are of God, they will be dealing with troubles. They will be having problems. There might be wars going on. Different things may be happening, but there will still be those who are not in the war or of the world who are going to be partying it up, just having a good old time. That's how both are possible at the same time. Now, does anybody have any more questions or comments as we go to the final section? Now would be the time to raise your hand. All right, then go ahead, Charles, and finish this out. Make sure you're in a good area to with your head turned so you can read.
Can you hear me clearly?
You just went robot on me. When you
Can you
said
hear me clearly now?
yeah, now you can.
Okay. I'm going to read Daniel chapter 9, verses 26 and 27. Verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war determined.
You just went
And he
robot
shall
on us again.
confirm the cup.
We heard the end of the war and then not afterwards.
Desolation determined.
Whoa, you just went way bad.
Still bad?
Yeah.
How about now?
Try again one more time.
How about now?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Okay, I can redo 20. And
Oh,
after
he
three
said
score
foot
and two,
and knee. That's how it came out. You're not good.
let-
Charles?
yep, I was saying, give me a second.
Okay. Man. What the heck? Let's
Is it
just do
still
this.
robotic?
Yes. Thomas, are you able to read?
Don't give me a spanking.
Yeah, I can try.
Mom, no.
All right. So, Charles, let's go ahead and
No,
let
I
Thomas
didn't.
read and give him the chance. So, you got the last two to read, Thomas.
Okay. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and until the end of the war, desolation are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. Even when the consummation and determined shall be poured upon the desolate. One second, guys. All right. All right, verse 26. Let me just read it one more time, real quick. And after this. Okay, so pretty much this is like the end. We're talking like the last few days type situation. So, um, which results in a flood. But let me actually go back and hold on. And after there, he score in 2 weeks, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the and the people of the prince that shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war, desolation are determined. Okay, let me go to the Strong's really quick, guys. You guys can hear me, right?
Yep, just muted.
Okay.
Remember to take it piece by piece if needed.
Yeah, yeah.
Start off with that first section and then continue on.
Yep. All right. So after 3 score, which is 60, 62 weeks, it says the Messiah should be cut off. So I take it this is after. And
Well, what are the possible meanings of cut off?
so after the fact that Messiah returns and he does what he needs to do in regards to judgment, he should be cut off, or no?
Well, no, after judgment is done and over with, right?
Right.
So,
So
it
he should
can't
be,
be after judgment.
yeah. 1 second, guys. Let me step
All
away. I
right.
got a lot going on.
No, you're good. Charles, what could be the possible interpretations of cut off?
First, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm still thinking about it right now.
Okay. All right. There's two possible interpretations of cut off, maybe three. One is killed. Two is separated or no longer having power. Or three, as a possibility, is that the third is separated. So separated from everybody. So either losing power, losing your life, or losing your connection to people or to God. Those are the possible interpretations of cut off. So after 3 score, how much is 3 scored, Thomas?
60.
Yeah. So after 62 weeks of the Messiah being there, the Messiah is going to be cut off. So the most likely interpretation there, he's not going to have power at that moment. Because we know the Messiah already did his death. So we can't be seeing that. I mean, it's possible that it happens again, but it wouldn't make sense for him to happen again. So based on the context, most likely loses power or is cut off from the people. But as it points out, but not for himself. So this is not for his own sake that he gets cut off, but for the people. And the people of the prince, well, as we just read about who the prince is, that's most likely talking about the Messiah. So the people of the Messiah, so the godly people that are following Jesus at the time of the end, are going to destroy the city. And thereof shall be with the, and the end thereof shall be with the flood. So there's going to be another flood that happens. Now, this is interesting for a couple reasons. For one, didn't God already say he's not going to destroy the whole world with a flood? Yeah. So this flood is not destroying the whole earth, but there is going to be some kind of flood, most likely in the city. There's going to be some kind of flood, and it's going to be there until the end of the war. And also that what will be there to the end of the war are going to be desolations. Now, as we talked about desolations, when it comes to with the children of Israel be exiled, it's emptiness, it's things being destroyed, nothing left type thing. And then this is a very important point because this adds context to the end as well. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Charles, what would that mean?
Confirm the covenant. As in confirming everything that was supposed to happen with the end times, like prophecies and all of that.
Is that a
Or
covenant?
us going to, or us the confirming the covenant of us going to heaven after doing our best to
Yeah.
follow. You mean that one?
So well, that's the only thing covenant. What else have we heard of covenant related to? It's only
I
been
can't
one
think of
thing.
one. Yeah, I can't think of another.
Yeah, it's only related to salvation. So this brings out a very important detail. We've read in the New Testament that when Jesus comes back, that every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. Right, Thomas?
Yep.
But interestingly enough, as this is showing, that's not going to be the first thing that happens. The first thing that's going to happen, there's going to be some turmoil. There's going to be some things going on. Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt in the midst of troubles. And then Jesus is going to come back. And then after he comes back, there's going to be 62 weeks. And then he's going to be cut off, most likely meaning cut off from power, not in charge of nobody. So even though he's the Messiah, he's still going to be cut off for a little bit. And then during that little bit, he's going to have 1 week where he confirms salvation with many. So in other words, at the very end, there's going to be 1 week where Jesus is still saving people. People are still getting saved at the very end for a week. Even to the very end of the end times, salvation is still being given out. And then as it goes out, and in the midst of the week, so in the middle of this week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So there'll be no more sacrifices, no more offerings in the middle of this week. And the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. So because the abominations, now, as we've seen from everything, what are abominations, Charles, generically speaking?
Generically speaking, the most foul, disgusting things.
I mean, it relates to the Bible, Charles. What does the Bible
Idolatry.
call abomination? Yeah, sins.
Idolatry.
Yeah, sins. So, for the overspreading of sins and abomination, the ones that are considered abominations, they're going to be so overspread, and because of that, he's going to make it desolate. So there's going to be emptiness, destruction all over the place until the consummation. Now, Charles, look up the word consummation.
Strong's definition from H3615, a completion, adverbally completely, also destruction. Keep going.
Exactly. So until like you can think of it as with consummation, the word consume is in there. Till everything is consumed and destroyed. So until everything is done, and the determined, so shall be poured upon the desolate. Now that could go a couple ways. Either one, that could mean that the ones that are servants of God are going to be fighting and being part of what's desolating everything, decimating. or that could be talking about the actual desolation that Jesus is bringing. That it's a determined end or a determined amount that's going to be poured upon the desolation. So there's a couple ways that you can look at that. But again, with all this stuff included, does it make sense that we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem that happened after Jesus, back in the around Jesus's time? Charles,
No, we're not.
it's an impossibility at this point, right, Thomas?
Lee.
Yep.
So the knees bowing, the tongues confessing, number one, that's not immediate. But if the whole world saw Jesus destroying everything, and specifically stating 40 abominations, the abominations being overspread, everything being destroyed by Jesus, would every tongue bow and every tongue confess and every knee bow after that? Charles?
My connection's going in and out. Let me try to move
Yeah, I
around.
hear you
Or-
still.
I didn't hear the question though.
Oh, now let me change the question since you didn't hear it. I'm glad you didn't hear it. When we look at everything of the knees bowing and the tongue confessing, if you just saw something coming off the clouds and it was on the news or whatever, would every knee bow and tongue confess seeing that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You sure? You
You
think
said if
every
it
knee would bow just by seeing that?
no, you do got some difficult people. Nah, a lot of knees. I'll say that. Let me say a lot of knees.
Yeah. That's an important distinction, though. There's a very big difference between every knee versus a lot of knees. Because there would be a lot of people that bow, but there would be a lot of people that don't bow. But, Thomas, if the whole world watched as Jesus destroyed dang near everything, brought everything to the point of desolation, and then poured out even more consuming of and things being destroyed, would every knee bow and tongue confess after that?
Yep.
So this adds a key detail to that situation that we can know as towards the tongues confessing and the knees bowing. It makes a lot more sense if it's happening after Jesus is destroying everything. Because if you had on the news where Jesus came on the clouds and everybody saw this, even if it was on the news across the whole earth, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that don't even believe it's real. They won't even believe that it's actually happening. And then even for those that do believe it's happening, if you see, as it brought up in 26, that he was cut off, that he didn't have power or whatever it is at that time that it means out of the two options, would a bunch of people be bowing before Jesus at that? No. He got taken out basically, even if not literally killed. But if you see him coming back, destroying everything, everything's consumed, everything's desolate. Yeah. When you see that level of power and that kind of power, every knee would bow, every tongue would confess. So even on Judgment Day, as we see from here, when Jesus comes back, and this will be the final question, go to Charles. When Jesus comes back, does that mean Judgment Day is immediately that day?
No.
And why would you think that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm forgetting something. I had it and I forgot it already. Give me a minute to
Charles,
think
I don't
about
want
it.
to correct you with the same correction you've had this whole week.
Go ahead.
I don't want to correct you with the same thing I've been correcting you on this whole week.
Oh, then skip me then.
Well, no. What was the correction I've given you this entire week? The same exact one every time.
The don't guessing part.
Was it just not to guess? Or was there another part to it?
I think backing up. When I answer the
Well, if
question,
I
I have to
correct
back
you
up
and you
answer
don't
for
even
it.
remember the correction, what's the point of correcting you, Charles? Thomas, do you know what the correction I've been giving Charles this whole week has been? It's been 2 parts.
No, I don't recall.
Okay, it's the same correction I gave you. I've given you guys both this correction multitude of times. Don't guess, go reread. Read the word. Don't just think on top of your head. Actually reread the word and figure it out. So Charles, reread 26.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut
Wait.
off.
Pause right there. 62 weeks. Is that immediate? Is
No.
that Judgment Day? So if you would have
No.
reread it, you would have had the answer, right?
Yeah, I see what you're talking about now.
I don't want to keep on giving you guys the same correction of something I'm telling you 1,000 times. I will out of love, but I don't want to have to be doing that. It's the same correction every time you guys guess. I don't just say don't guess. I always add it with reread. Both of you should have had the answer to it. Don't guess, reread, and figure it out. Charles, it shouldn't have even been a question for you as to the knowing for sure. Because the moment you read the first sentence part of 26, you have your answer, right?
Right.
So anytime that goes on, when a question pops up, don't guess. Reread and see what you can figure it out. Now, so the answer is no. When Jesus comes back, it is not immediately Judgment Day. There is a time frame prior to the actual day of judgment to where there's destruction going on, abominations, sins are overspreading throughout the whole world. There's going to be people attacking the city, which is most likely God's city, Israel, Jerusalem. We're going to have 70 weeks or 7 weeks before Jesus even comes back. And then we're going to have a few weeks after Jesus comes back where we have a bunch of things going on that they struggle with, they deal with. And then to top it off, there's a whole extra week where that week he's giving a whole bunch of people a chance to be saved, but only for 1 week. And in the middle of that week, he's going to stop all sacrifices and all offerings. And for the cause of the overspread of abominations, he's going to make it desolate, destruction galore, all in the middle of that week. So that's what we have here. So the end of chapter 9, the whole section, we're all talking about the very end of the end. And for anybody that thinks Judgment Day is immediate, as soon as Jesus returns, you haven't read Daniel yet. Or you didn't look at context. Because from all we've seen, number one, it's not immediately as he comes back. Number two, Jerusalem and everything is going to be rebuilt prior to him coming back by, I think it said 70 weeks or 7 weeks. And then the place is going to get destroyed pretty much soon after. Now, here's the last part that I want to bring up. When Jesus said in the New Testament in Matthew, when we look at that New Testament part in Matthew, where he brings up about when the end is going to be, if we're talking about all this time, how long is 62 weeks, Charles?
A year and 10 weeks.
A year and 10 weeks. And then prior to that, the 7 weeks. So are we talking about a mass amount of time, Thomas?
No, not really.
Wouldn't this all, if we look at the time frame, Charles, doesn't this sound like this is all happening over the course of one generation?
Yes.
So now it's not just a possibility. Now we actually have confirmation. In Matthew, I believe it was 24, could be wrong about that. When it says all that stuff will happen, it's all listed right here in Daniel 9 at the end of times, that all of that destruction and everything is going to take place over the, and it all is happening. It's not happening over multitude of generations. This is one generation. This ain't even like 10 years. And if we look at all this stuff, Thomas, does it, and this will be the last question for the whole study, doesn't this sound like every single thing that he listed in Matthew 24 is happening?
It low key does.
Well, there we go. Every single thing listed in Matthew 24 is happening in this vision depiction of Daniel chapter 9. Every single part. So when we go back to Matthew 24 and write this in your guys' notes, Matthew 24 is confirmed to be the end times through Daniel, or let me make sure it's Matthew 24 first. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it is Matthew 24. See, that's how you know the Bible. You ain't even gotta be sure. It just comes out in verse 3 of 24. And he sat upon the Mount of Olives, and the disciples came unto him privately, saying, "Tell us when shall all these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world?" So yes, Matthew 24 is confirmed through Daniel chapter 9 that all of that is happening at the end of the world. And it all is happening over the course of one generation. So when Jesus says, "This generation shall not pass," he's not talking about the generation of the apostles. He's talking about the generation when the first portion of it starts, as we just read in Daniel chapter 9. So make sure in your notes you put Daniel 9 confirms for Matthew 24 is talking about the end of the world, not the generation of the apostles. That's not what it means by this generation. It means the generation when all that is taking place. So whenever somebody says that all that in Matthew 24 is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened right after Matthew 20, after Jesus was gone, ascended, well, no, it's not. There were parts missing even then, but also it's confirmed in in Daniel chapter 9. Every one of this is confirmed. We're talking about the end of everything. There was no flood at that destruction of Jerusalem during the time frame of when Jesus was around, that time point. There was no destruction of Jerusalem that ended and there was a flood. Didn't happen. And there wasn't 1 week that we read about where Jesus started giving people that ability 1 week. And the destruction or the rebuilding of Jerusalem, it didn't happen 7 weeks before Jesus came. Jesus had already been around for almost 33 years. And after the Messiah, when it talks about that, We're talking about a few weeks that all this stuff is happening after. Well, when Jesus came, when he was born, Jerusalem was not destroyed 62 weeks after Jesus was born. So it can't be the same destruction. It has to be something different because of the context. So again, Daniel 9 confirms that Matthew 24 is talking about the end of the world, not talking about the destruction of Jerusalem that happened right after Jesus ascended. Two different time frames and confirmed by Daniel 9. All right. Now, does anybody have any comments or questions before we pray it out? Now would be the time to raise your hand. All right. Then, Thomas, since you were the last to read, do you want to pray us out or do you got too much background noise?
Should be good.
All right. Let me go ahead and mute and you can pray us.
All right, if everybody can bow their heads with me. All righty. Heavenly Father, thank you for a good Bible study where we touch the bases on the end times in comparison to the times of Jerusalem when things took place there. Now we have a better understanding of Daniel and also things of that nature. So we're grateful to have Matt as a wonderful teacher to explain these things for us. We pray to have Matt in our lives for as long as possible so we can continue to thrive and to continue to grow in your word each and every day. I pray that we all live to see another day tomorrow, to have another great Bible study, and to close it out with getting good rest and a good meal and taking care of the business we need to. And in Jesus' mighty name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. All right. Now, I told you guys at the beginning already what our listening is for today. You guys got that, right?
Yup.
You said Second Kings chapter what?
2 Kings chapter 1 is the final chapter.
Chapter 1. Okay, gotcha. Writing it down. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful night. Oh, and Charles, I'm gonna call you in a sec.